Franziska, welcome to this edition of the Optimal Leadership podcast. For the viewers and the listeners, many of whom will already know you, Franziska, just a brief introduction from me. Your assistant lecturer at ESMT Berlin, eminent scholar and academic in the field of leadership. Of course, you've got a very famous, renowned book out there, The Power of Humility in Leadership. And so we'll talk about that today. What we'll also talk about is that in the context of circumstance and luck in leadership. Franziska, it's a great pleasure to have you with us today for this conversation.
A great pleasure seeing you again, Wilf.
Franziska, we've worked together for almost a decade now, and a great pleasure to work with you and discuss many topics with you. Humility is the big one. So to start with that, Franziska, just to give us a little bit of context, what is it that leaders feel uncomfortable with in the area of humility?
I think it's mainly the word. As soon as you get people to think about the definition of humility, the very short definition of humility is the ego-free view from the balcony, i.e. looking, so to say, objectively above yourselves. What does the situation require of you? As soon as people understand that, then they're actually fully on board with humility. Because humility doesn't mean hiding your light under the bushel. It means seeing what needs to be done and therefore doing it. So it means you can actually humbly fire someone. And as soon as people understand that and get that bigger picture view, they're actually very, very happy with humility.
Thanks, Franziska. That's perfectly clear. We're going to talk specifically about luck and circumstance. And that of course, seems quite connected with the theme of humility, because I would imagine that it takes some humility for leaders in times of success to attribute some of the success to maybe circumstance, to luck. What's your view, Franziska? How much of a role does luck, circumstance play relative, for example, to innate ability, to perseverance?
So it's really interesting. There's lots of different research out there. So researchers have looked at the role of a CEO. How much can a CEO actually shift? And there are three different types of researchers, and they're more or less split third by third. One third says up to 40-50%. In fast moving industry, one person at the helm of a company can attribute as much as 50%, 40-50% of the changes of the successes to themselves. The other thing is the rest of the company. The other thing is luck and circumstances. Another third says it's max 5%. It's all luck and circumstances. We justify our activities and therefore attribute that which actually happened accidentally to ourselves. And then there's sort of, to say, the Aristotelian middle. So there are people who say one person at the helm can affect about 20-25%. There is less, of course, in industries that are slow changing, slow moving, or if you've had a really great leader ahead of you. So you can see it's very different the way people look at it. To some extent, if you say before you has been a mad micromanager, someone who is really controlling everyone very tightly, no one has a sense of being allowed to work freely. Now, if now you come in and, so to say, open the windows, i.e. let people do their own thing, you only give a very clear direction, but leave people up to how they do it within that direction, then to a certain extent, you can attribute 100% of the changes to you, but you couldn't have done any of it without the other. So I think it's really quite useful to assume, on the one hand, that a lot, let's say 50, 60, 70% of what we do is supported by luck and circumstances without us getting depressed. Because, of course, I'm not arguing against self-efficacy. And as you quite rightly said, the word perseverance, grit is really, really powerful. And if we keep on trying, of course, if we keep on trying, we are likely to succeed more than if we fail once and give up.
So organizations and leaders that recognize the role that that luck and circumstance plays, that they will effectively have different kinds of cultures, I assume, to those that attribute all of the success to their own ability and their own hard work. Do you see a difference there?
So it's very hard for humans to notice that they're not actors. we do like to make ourselves actors. So, yes, you're right. There is a slight indication that companies where people are humbler, that they are more tolerant of their own failings and of errors and failings and non successes of others. But it's a daily struggle, to be honest, because we do like to say, oh, I got the client because I called him or her in this particular way. It's very hard for us to say the client was sold anyway. Anyone in my company could have got an even better deal out of him or her. So it's an uphill struggle.
Yeah, in my experience, it's easier to think of the bad luck and the unfortunate circumstances when we're looking at the results. Having been in a variety of leadership positions, and I assume not become worse as a leader, but the success level hasn't always improved. So I guess sometimes that's down to sometimes good luck plays a role, and sometimes bad luck plays a role. But I guess also there's an element of leaders being put in the right situations where they're more likely to be successful, more likely to lead. Is there a role for those that appoint leaders, for leaders who are accepting positions to decide, this is a circumstance where I'm more likely to be lucky or more likely to be successful?
Yes, I think there are two elements. There's one, actually three elements. The first one is, do I have a good match with that role? Am I passionate? Do I already see where I can take the company or the department? And then go for it. The second one has to do with training yourself for it. I just recently again read a piece of research. 44% of managers have not received training for the role that they're about to take. So you can say how bad of the companies, yes. And I think you can also say how unhumble of the people taking a role for which they haven't received or aren't fighting for receiving training. So even if there's a role that I think is attractive, and I'm a bit worried how much I'm going to be possibly even more victim of luck and circumstances because I'm not a master of the situation, well, then it would be humble and the right thing to do to go out and get that training. And the third thing, of course, there's always something called serendipity. And serendipity is a bit of a mindset thing. The idea of fostering an ability in ourselves that lucky circumstances can happen. And that is something to do with looking broadly at things. You know, that those days when you have the feeling that if there was something above, it's really giving you all the good. Possibly there is no one above. I hope I'm not
Mm.
insulting anyone here, but it's more about our way in which we openly regard our surroundings, in which we are unjudged and non-judgmental, in which we are really willing to let new things happen and occur. So I think any of those three things are going to put the person into the right place at the right time with the right mindset.
Mm. Yeah, I can see that it requires a little bit of humility and also a willingness to accept a loss of control, to accept that not everything is down to us. Our circumstances do play a part. Things that are out of our control play a part, much as we would like sometimes as leaders, as CEOs, to be able to control. And I guess we're all lucky to one degree or another. Lucky to have had the education that we've had. Lucky to have been offered the roles and had the experiences. Sometimes lucky to have had the mentors that we've had. So, however much we become more effective instruments and more able to lead with power, with clarity, with effectiveness. We're all the product of so much luck that's gone into making us who we are, and I think that that helps us when things are going well as when things are not going so well to be resilient. Is that your experience, Franziska?
Yes, fully. So I often ask participants how much of the successes of your life are due to you. And I get numbers on average around 50, 60%, but I get numbers even going up to 100%. And I would say I'm responsible for about 10% of the success of my life. The other 90% are due to the fact that I was born healthy, unlike my middle son, who had a heart issue that needed to be operated on a number of times. In a country that still hasn't got a war, in economic, more or less often boom times, and with parents who quite liked me, and who were also fostering independence and free thinking and resilience. So if I had grown up in another country or in this country with narrow minded parents, I wouldn't have been able to do the things that I have been able to do. Yeah. So I think circumstances and luck play a huge role. And it's useful for us to remember to be grateful for that. But it's also even more important to understand that we shouldn't judge others too harshly for not getting to where we have got. Because then it's two things. On the one hand, we have simply been lucky. And secondly, the circumstances which gave us the chance to grasp this luck may not have been there for the others.
So most importantly, in being successful or necessary to condition to be successful, if not sufficient, is to be lucky and to have been lucky. Yeah.
Yes, yes, and
And
to
really
keep
to
at it. I mean,
consider.
your point of resilience is very valid. We should also try and be resilient and bounce up again. So that's another thing about humility. We only have one life. Again, hopefully not insulting anyone. We only have one life. So I have to have a humility towards my own life. So I think there is a duty, as long as we can in any way muster the energy, to really try again and again, to not let ourselves be defeated in such a fundamental way that we think that our life has been ineffectual. But again, possibly I can only say that sentence because I was brought up in a family where that is the mindset.
Right.
On the other hand, we know with neuroplasticity and with coaching, we can actually achieve a lot of mindset changes also in people age 60, 80, 120 onwards. So we are always malleable and can always adapt.
Yeah, and that takes some positive experience to realize, I think. And I go back a few decades, and I had a feeling that the attributes, the skills, the capability I had across all forms of intelligence, whether music, academic, or sporting, that was pretty much set by the time I was midway through my teenage years. And it took me another 2 or 3 decades to realize that isn't the case at all. That we're plastic on many dimensions. And again, back to the it's the circumstance and the luck that we have that sometimes helps us to make that breakthrough and to realize what capability potential we have in new areas.
Yeah. And I think it also has to do with how much we believe we or realize how much we have changed. So I often ask the following question: how much has your personality changed in the last 10 years? Hardly at all, a bit, or a lot. And most people say sort of here, between quite a bit and a lot. Now I ask people, how likely is your personality going to change in the next 10 years? And now on average, I get this. But this
Mm.
research has been done with 18,000 people aged 18 to 68. So it means a 58-year-old one is wrong when he or she says, I'm hardly going to change, because the average of 68-year-old ones say, oh, I changed quite a bit in the last 10 years.
Mm.
So we have the illusion that we've arrived in our final personality, i.e., the sort of the end of history personality. And I think once we train ourselves to realize how much we have changed in the past, even if we feel we've always been in the same job, it doesn't matter. Even in the same job, we've experienced many changes. So if we tell ourselves a story of persistent change, it's much easier to embrace the changes in the future. If we tell ourselves the story of, oh, it's always been the same and I've always done the same thing and never grown, well, then of course, any challenge, any change is going to be much more daunting.
That really is quite profound and quite insightful and really instructive as we think about ourselves changing and taking on more in the future. You remind me of, I think it was one of the Rolling Stones who said, long time after the event, that his biggest regret in life was thinking he was old and therefore unable to change at the age of 58.
Mm. Very, very good. Yeah. There's the danger. Like my father always says he felt that he was always too young for a job and then it switched and suddenly was too old for a job. He's still doing enough of other good things, but it's that perspective that sometimes we are too young and we're never really fitting, but we're always fitting or we can always make it fitting.
Yes, we certainly can. Some people watching and listening to us, as leaders, as CEOs, they might be saying, well, this is really the soft stuff. What about the hard stuff? One school of thought that I subscribe to is the soft stuff is actually the hard stuff, but it's probably not as simple as that, as black and white. So love to get a few of your thoughts as a leading academic in this space. Are we talking here about the easy things or the difficult things, the things that matter or the things that don't really count at all?
I think it's really interesting. I think both really count, the hard stuff and the soft stuff. And as so often in life, it has to do with the right balance. I love the story of Chang Ruimin, who took over the Jingdao refrigerator company, I think in '86 or so it was, and was really badly run. It made losses. It had an awful culture. People were defecating and urinating on the floor. It was really catastrophic. All of the refrigerators were broken that were delivered to clients, or nearly all. So what did he do? He said, everyone now come out into the yard and take a sledgehammer. Anyone who doesn't come out into the yard gets fired, more or less. Anyone who doesn't take a sledgehammer gets fired. And now we are going to together destroy every single one of the last 76 faulty refrigerators. And I'm going to join you as well. This is hard stuff. So everyone destroyed the refrigerators, and it became a very clear sign that that things had fundamentally changed at that company. So sometimes you have to do the hard stuff. You have to punish people. You have to fire people. You have to do things to make sure that the company is 100% in line with where you want to take it to. And you'll most likely know, and many of your listeners will also know, Chang Ruimin, of course, then became the CEO of Haier. So the company started growing and growing, and the sledgehammer is in the Haier Museum. So that's the hard stuff. But if he had continued always sanctioning, chastising, being loud and noisy, people would not have come along with him. So you need to balance it with the next thing of giving direction. And if you look at the 6 leadership styles that Daniel Goleman has so nicely built up from the topic of emotional intelligence, the first one, using the sledgehammer and forcing people to do it, is the coercive style. But a really important one is the visionary style. Where are we going to? And really giving people a story to which to aspire and autonomy to do things freely within that space. The third one is affiliative. You as people are important to me. So that's another soft stuff. I need to be interested in what my people do. And there's a really great story about a police superintendent who actually said to his officers, every week you have to have a conversation. I think every month, sorry. Every month you have to have a conversation with each of your officers. And 50% of the time has to be about what does this person do or feel at home, because you cannot lead people unless you know how they are. And that actually helped. It was for the Humberside police force, helped that Humberside police force go from 44th in the UK as in terms of efficiency and culture up to number 1. Then you have the democratic leadership style. Sometimes you need to get, or quite often, you need to get information from within the company. Is that soft? Well, I wouldn't say it's soft. It's asking for opinion. You still get to make many of the decisions. Then there's pace setting, which is showing how things get done. If you sometimes have to work through the night, well, then you have to show it. If you only work through the night, people are going to hate you and you're going to die. Yeah, so it's not a particularly efficient one. And the last one is coaching. And coaching seems so very soft because I actually help people along, I nudge them, I support them. But on the other hand, it's actually quite a hard fact. People who are well coached need less resources. They get things done more efficiently. They perform better. So it has a hard result, even though the input to a certain extent may have been soft. So I think this division between hard and soft, with the value that is attached to it, is slightly off. You have to be a leader in every situation, and every situation demands a different style of leadership.
Right. And you might argue, Franziska, that every situation really just requires the optimal balance between the 6 different leadership styles of government. Some require more vision, some require more democratic, participative approach. Would you
Yes.
say that it's very much circumstantial depending on the situation?
Yes, very much so. And I did a piece of research only with 100 people. So this is a small indication that people who master all the 6 leadership styles are actually the ones that motivate their employees most, that are also seen as strongest in the company, where people are least willing to quit, and where people also have the feeling that they perform better because of their manager. Because that's, of course, what you would love. You would love that people perform better. And whenever I ask, does a good manager make people better by how much percent? I, on average, get about, they make people about 50% better. If I ask how much does a bad leader make people worse, it goes to 70, 80%. Yeah. So we all have that gut feeling that leaders, to a certain extent, have a greater downside than they have an upside. I mean, if you remember the time when you weren't a CEO, how much did you need your manager in everyday life once you had settled well into the job?
Not so
Typically
much.
not that much. Typically not that much. You need them to get the resources to fight for something, resolve conflicts. But typically, if you are a master of your role, then you can do this even if your manager isn't there. So we shouldn't overestimate, again, coming back to luck and circumstances, we shouldn't overestimate the impact of a manager if he's good or she. But you can't overestimate the impact of someone who's awful and who really demotivates you or shouts at you or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. I'm smiling because you remind me of this would have been during COVID, or as COVID was coming to an end, and one of my adult children was asked to return to the office, and the argument against it was that there's too much management presence, which is getting in the way of getting the job done.
Yes, yes. That's the worst thing that can happen when people are only happy at work when you're gone. Shouldn't aspire
Yeah.
to that.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's there's much food for thought in there. And I'm wondering, as listening to you, that I think many people would agree with pretty much everything that you're saying. That makes sense to pay attention to the people that we have. You know, just maybe to spend the 50% of the time asking them how they are, etc., and avoiding being a bad manager. There's been more and more discussion about this. There are lots of books that have been written. Do you think leaders are changing, or do you think we're just talking about becoming better leaders more than we used to?
So, so I've got data sets now with the humility, and there doesn't seem to be an age difference. That's the one thing. On the other hand, age difference in how leaders act. On the other hand, I've heard sort of lots of reports from people who interact with leaders. For example, there used to be, or they still are, the Baden-Badener Unternehmergespräche. That's where top leaders meet, typically German top leaders. And someone said that in the 50s, 60s, 70s, you still had a lot of these alpha males who said, I'm the hero of it all. And now it's become much softer. So I think the way we talk about leadership and the way we try and position ourselves has generally become softer. Apart from, if you look at all this discussion about the masculine energy and about the tech companies, which is now again going into this sphere of, oh, isn't it great if there's one or two people at the top who really say what needs to be done? So I think you cannot really say it globally. We know that people are more allergic to, or have become more allergic to very hierarchical and directive leaders. Do they change companies? Well, again, it depends on the economic circumstances. Sometimes they may be able or not to. So I think it's a mixture again of this a bit more awareness. Some people are changing, but others are actually relishing the fact that if they have a startup and are in control of the finances, then they can be a really difficult, oppressive, paternalistic manager as officially they were in the past. But even in the past, you often had people who were open and listener and so on.
Yeah, again on the dimensions of um, sort of variability. I'm just wondering whether you see any difference in what's appropriate leadership in, say, a large multinational versus a startup. Are different leadership styles innately required, or maybe are different leadership styles required in different geographies, but based on cultural differences? What's the what's the research telling us there, Franziska?
So it was interesting coming also from the interviews with you about humility and humility in Asia. And you told the nice story how you share when you went to business schools to get some more insights, and how some people may think that really weird of the CEO to mention that they still have to learn something. But you were effective. Even in a culture where you typically don't show that many weaknesses. So, to my mind, in every culture, you can use every leadership style. Sometimes you may have to do a bit more upfront. So I used to do quite a lot of work in Russia and other Eastern European countries, and there you first have to present yourself as really, really strong. If you are the hero, so to say, then after a while you can start inviting other people in.
Right.
If you come in immediately and say, "I've got no idea, please help me," it's not going to work. But to be honest, that also doesn't work in a Western multinational. I just recently heard the story of someone who was promoted out of her colleagues. And in her Christmas speech, or in her first speech to the team, she said, well, I'm a bit worried about this because I don't really know how I'm going to go about it, and I look forward to your support. Hmm. There's someone misjudging the role that they have voluntarily taken on. And I think that's one of even more the key point. I think in multinationals or larger companies, people often defer their decision making to others. They always think I have to ask and ask and ask for permission, or I have to include everyone. Whereas people in a startup are more often willing to say, this needs to be done, possibly be very nice about it, but this needs to be done. And I think it's much more powerful if people also in multinationals take upon themselves what needs to be done. And in this case, it may need to be done that I cut across some silos, and that I go into conflict for someone, and that I disrupt the system. I can do it kindly. I mean, I still love your story. I'm not sure that I can share it. I love your story about how you tried, well, published it actually, so I'm sure I can share it. I love your story how you made clear that you wanted to have a different culture in your company, and that therefore you were going to sit with the sales team, and you were going to restructure the office, rebuild the office to have only open spaces. And that the people who said they would still like their own office, you said, thank you very much for telling me. I'm going to help in each and every one of you find a new job. And I think this is it. You then coached them out so appreciatively that there was no damage. But I think it is really important that in any company, people can decide, I know what's the best for this department or for this company, and then go about doing it effectively and clearly, without insulting people, but still effectively and clearly. So I think people tend to hide a bit behind what they perceive as the culture. Last point on this, of course, you have toxic cultures in every size company. So if I look at the humility, there is actually no size difference there. And sometimes it may be the humble thing to do to leave. You, as I say, you only have one life, you only have one working life, even though different companies, sometimes it may be a duty for you to actually give up and say, this is not a fight that I can win because I'm on my own and the other 10 around me are all mad. And then that's fine. Then you should have to go.
Yeah, wow, there's so much in there that I'd love to comment on it, and I think the culture fit's a really interesting one. You remind me of the Jack Welch comment years ago that he didn't try to change the culture at GE until he was the CEO, because some things are just outside our sphere of influence, and if we really can't fit in the culture and we can't change the culture or play a role in bringing about the change, then maybe in this life of, maybe even if we're lucky to get 100 years of healthy life, it's still a part of our life that's disappearing in the wrong place, where there'll be frustration and tension. Your comment about the different countries and cultures, it does resonate, I think, everywhere. Appearing confident without being arrogant seems to be an advantage, and showing vulnerability at the right time, and building the confidence of the team first. I think it's in the Philippines more than 20 years ago, one of my leaders said, the thing we're looking for in the CEO, or the thing people are looking for most, is that the CEO knows what they're doing. And if people don't believe that you know what you're doing, it's hard for them to get behind you, even when you ask for help. And there are not many universal truths in business, but that seems to be one that you've you picked up on there. That CEOs need to look like they know what they're doing and be confident.
I've got a really great story on that. I interviewed a CEO of a small bank, and in the course of the interview, she said, I only go with negative news and problems to the supervisory board. Now, do you think she's still CEO of that quite well run bank? No, of course not, because she didn't show what she was doing well. Now she's board member of another bank, and now she says, I go to the supervisory board with good news, lots of good pieces of news, and of course I don't hide the problems, and I also ask for
Mm.
advice. So it's that thing, often people do their job well, but they don't talk about it. And I think this is
Mm.
another duty that surprisingly people initially don't connect with humility, but then they do. I have to sell the good work that my team and I do. to others. And this is where quite a lot of people say, I'm not the person to advertise myself. I don't really like it. That plays no role. I have a duty to show what is going on. And as a CEO, I have a duty to show that I more or less know where we're going to. And of course, asking others and bringing them on board, but I have a duty to show. Yeah, and I have a duty then to say this we did really, really well. Not say all I did well, but this we did really well, and this we did really well, and then we still have some problems. There's a duty to get the balance right.
I mean, this really, I think many people will struggle with this idea. Leaders who like to get things done but don't like to blow their own trumpet. They're happy for other people to say good things about them and hopefully don't always believe it and recognize the conflicts, etc. But what's the advice you would give to leaders who are humble by nature and don't want to appear boastful or arrogant? How can they be sure that the board, for example, or other key stakeholders get to a balanced picture that doesn't seem to be too self-promoting?
They need to share the good pieces of news. They really must, because people who are seen as performing well get more resources, they get more airtime. So, to a certain extent, they are not negotiating for themselves, they are negotiating for their team and for what they believe should be done. So, I think if they take their own personality out of it and say, I'm not advertising myself, I'm advertising what has been done with the team, for the company, for the clients, then I think it may change. And that self-referential, I don't like doing it, becomes irrelevant. I mean, it's the same if you become CEO or if you become department head, there's no choice not to deliver the Christmas party speech. There's no choice. You may hate it. Well, then find yourself a coach and do it. Yeah, you don't have to learn absolutely everything in a new position, but those things that are relevant so that others see you and are therefore willing to trust you and give you more resources, more airtime, and that people are happy to work for you. I mean, I'm happy to work for someone if I see that they are being seen within the company. I'm not happy to work for someone if we are hidden away, and there's no way I'm ever going to get out of that. So I'm doing it not only for myself, but for the greater good if I advertise what I've done with the others.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I think particularly for CEOs, which is a different type of leadership, being the senior executive in the organization, far more of how one uses one's time is discretionary than whether people believe it or not. And in my experience, that's largely the case. And so there can be a gravitational pull towards doing the things that we know that we're good at or that we enjoy, rather than the things that are just part of the responsibility that comes with being a leader, with being the most senior executive, particularly maybe uh, during a crisis. And I'd just like to talk about crisis management for a moment, because I guess it's in times of crisis that leaders get put to the test. Are there any the themes related to humility that you would say are particularly resonate or particularly important in a time of organizational crisis, Francisco?
So I think one thing is to remember that most things will not be on your gravestone. That however big the crisis is now, we have survived many, most companies have survived many, and even if they go under, lives will go on. I think putting it to a certain extent in perspective without belittling it, not belittling it, but putting it into perspective. And then rallying forces, really getting people and one's own mindset into more the direction of sort of frugal innovation. It's easy to innovate and be creative, we would think, if times are good. But actually, what we can see from neuroscience is our brains are even more active if they have a positive goal and limited resources. Then our brain becomes much more active. An example, if I ask you to design a good slogan for your company using as many words as you wish and as many sentences, it's really quite hard. If people get the task, write a slogan of 5 words, one being something to do with star or sun or moon, it becomes much easier. So you can measure that they become much more innovative. So if you manage to generate a feeling of being in this together, in solving this problem together, you will actually generate quite a lot of forces for innovation. What goes really bad in crisis if people go, oh, it's all horrible, it's horrible, horrible, and only negative things come out of it. Then it falters, and if people fumble it. Oh, that was fumbled.
Got it. Okay, got it. So actually, um, if I hear this correctly, sometimes manufacturing a, let's call it maybe a mini crisis, or at least a problem, maybe not a real burning platform, is a good way to get people to be resourceful, to be creative.
Yes. Yes, that is, it's so interesting that you say it's not happening, but we can manufacture it. Yes, it's something generating that sense of urgency also that Kotter always says for times of change. And that sense of urgency can also be a sense of scarcity. We have only a short time window to get something done, or we've got a lower budget. I mean, the famous story about the Renault manager who was tasked to build a car at, I think, about half the cost of what it had done beforehand. And because it was a clear goal and there was a clear time frame, everyone got thinking and then they solved it. I'm not saying we can fly to the moon within a week or so. So be sure to give a sort of sensible goal. But so much more is possible. And I mean, we saw it during COVID. Suddenly, processes that took forever were much faster. And so that type of emergency shouldn't have to be as big as COVID. That type of mini emergency to generate that is not a bad idea, or to generate a sort of competition with ourselves. It doesn't always have to be with others, but sort of so to say, let's generate a competition with ourselves. Next year, we want to be 10% better. Let's be as creative as we can to get there. That already galvanizes people into thinking.
Yeah, so I guess necessity is the mother of invention. It's a cliche because it's true. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've been working with large companies, with small businesses within large companies, and also with small independent businesses. And certainly, one of the general themes that I've witnessed is that smaller organizations, maybe startups with less resource, they um, tend to be more creative naturally, and also more cognizant of resource and less wasteful of resource, whether that's time or money or space. Is that something that you would see as a general truism? And if so, how to prevent small companies developing maybe some of these more wasteful habits as they become larger organizations? Is there a role for leadership in that?
Yeah, definitely. So, next to humility and other leadership topics, I also teach about rules of influencing. And one whole set of rules of influencing comes from the automatisms of our brain. Our brain worldwide functions exactly the same. And the one element that we know, we hate losses much more than we like gains. You can actually measure that people are fearful or horrified by a loss 2.2 times as much as they are entitled or delighted by a gain. Why? Losses are worked through in the amygdala, very old part of our brain, very emotional, gains in the prefrontal cortex. So if I'm in a startup situation or in a small company, I want to do everything to avoid the losses. I haven't yet put in that much, but that I've put in is so very close to my heart. So I'm trying to do absolutely everything that the company is not going to fail. If I'm a very successful company, I'm here, I'm in the gains phase. How much more exciting is it to earn another million if I've already got 500 million? It's not that exciting. If I have got 20,000 to earn another million, it's really exciting. Yeah. So there I go and do something. If I'm here in the gains phase, people tend to become risk averse. So this is one of the really dangerous things in decision making, that big companies become cumbersome because they don't want to threaten or endanger their fat books. But of course, you can do that. You can work that around that. And this is one of the rules of influencing. Imagine I say to you, every month that we don't do this project, we lose 1 million. You're much more likely to get people shifted than if you say every month we could earn another 1 million if we do this project. That's not as sexy, but we lose every month, we lose it, and then make it vivid and available by saying that's a whole department, or that's 5 company cars, 7 Christmas parties, and a better new building. Then it becomes vivid and available. So it's our duty as leaders, as managers, to make sure that people don't fall prey to the automatisms of the brain, and particularly this is the most famous of them all. Kahneman got the Nobel Prize for it because Tversky was already dead, but this is one that you could apply daily. It's also one that you have to be very careful of for sunk costs. Regardless of which company, people hate realizing sunk costs. So that's where some really nice research from INSEAD comes to bear, that people who do breath meditation, I really breathing, being in the here and now, they find it much easier to say, okay, we invested quite a lot in that past project, but it's no longer any good. Let's shut it down, because they're in the here and now. So there are duties for leaders to make sure that people are in the here and now in the right mindset, i.e., sometimes being willing to avoid losses and sometimes also being willing to realize gains.
Is that why new leaders coming in from outside find it easier to take tough action in respect of what's happened in the past?
Fully wonderful example. Exactly, that's what happens because they are not emotionally tied to it. And that was really cool when Andy Grove, who at that time was the CEO of Intel, and Intel had been growing wonderfully with memory chips, and then all the competitors had arrived and Intel wasn't really able to fight against them. And then Andy Grove said to his colleague Moore, the one of Moore's law, said, if a new CEO came in, would he get us out of memory chips? And then Moore said, yes, he would. So Andy then said, let's imagine we are the new CEO and get us out of memory chips. So exactly what you said. I can either be a new person or I can pretend to be a new person. And that already helps me to get out of the sunk costs. Very, very powerful tool.
Plenty of advantage in being the pretender to be the new person, because you got the advantages of the history, the knowledge, the background, as well as the thinking of being like a new person.
Yeah, because there's a danger that the new person has. If the new person comes in and says, we have to change A, B, C, D because that's all bad, people immediately don't feel appreciated for the past. So it's a really important thing that the new leader says, oh, isn't it amazing how times have changed? That which worked really well in the past now no longer works. Here, see the proof. So, therefore, giving appreciation for what has happened in the past and not immediately saying, oh, this is all so badly run, we have to change everything. Yeah, because then people get not only unappreciated, but demotivated and actually quite angry.
Mm. Can you name a couple of other examples you've seen of organizations that have been able to reinvent themselves and what they do without a new leadership team, but doing it with the existing team being able to act like they have a fresh start?
So I don't know the story from the inside, but from the outside, for example, Siemens Health, they had already nearly finished building a building for 300 or so euro, a million, 300 million euro, with a cell therapy where a laser was going to kill the cells on the cellular level. And they uncovered that they could only get 1,000 patients through a year, not 2,000. So someone in that company managed to decide, let's tear this down. Let's say no to sunk costs. And I'm not sure whether they were fired or not. I actually doubt it. So they still have a research reactor somewhere where they do exactly that, but they managed to step away from the sunk costs. That's one example. And I've seen others where people, and that's a bit harder to name because they aren't big companies, they're more departments, where people say, I managed to effect a change in the company culture and in the performance. And one example has something to do with another tool of influencing called labeling. We tend to accept what other people say to us. If I say to you, Wilf, I've got to know you as someone really open and innovative. That's a label I'm attaching to you. Do you agree? Because it's a positive label, it's very unlikely that you're going to say, no, I'm not open and innovative. I'm a really narrow minded person. And now I can say, and because you're open and innovative, can I ask you to take part in this project? And now it's much harder for you to say no. And someone told me the following story. She had wanted to introduce new values and new culture into her department to make them more performant. And she'd always asked an employee to organize this workshop. And the employee had always said, nah, no time, don't think it's a good idea. And then she labeled that employee by saying, I'm surprised you don't want to organize this workshop, because to my mind, you are one of my employees that already most embodies the values and the culture that I want to instill. Do you agree? Label, commitment, and consistency. The employee started thinking, hmm, ah, yeah, I agree. Organized the workshop and then became one of the initiators of that whole change, which then led to better performance afterwards. So I know a number of those smaller stories, and they need the concerted effort, first of all, of the manager, and then also him or her managing to get people on board to really be in this together, which gets you again to the soft leadership elements, plus providing the vision. And I don't know whether you would say providing the vision is hard or soft. I think it's sort of somewhere in between.
Thanks. Yeah, yeah. You remind me of a couple of uh, instructive experiences that I had many years ago. I had a very good chairman who knew I was. It was a tough change I was leading in the organization as CEO, and a couple of times I guess he labeled me, and I was able to do some, for me at the time, things that were quite extraordinary that I didn't believe I wouldn't have believed I could have done. But with him having labeled me carefully and motivated me to go out and be what he told me I was, I became that, and I thought that was incredible chairmanship and a wonderful skill. At times, it can sound, I think, a little bit manipulative. But if it helps to influence people to do things that are good for them and good for the organization and to be them best selves, then, well, I'd say that's probably positive manipulation.
I fully agree. And I mean, if he was humble, then he most likely would have believed it anyway, because he would believe the positive thing of nearly
Yes.
all. And that then gets this cycle going, this virtuous cycle. And it's a bit like I really love David Copperfield by Dickens. And there's that great sentence in there where he says, "The headmaster of my school treated the boys as if they were the people they could become, and therefore they became the people they
Mm.
should." So it's that way of, if I treat you as the best to do the job, it is very, very likely that you are going to become the best to do that job, particularly if I help and support you where it's needed.
Yeah, and if we internalize it, then it's, well, it's one of, not mine, but I'm happy to quote Henry Ford saying, you know, whether you believe you can or whether you believe you can't, you're right.
Mm.
And you know, so often it's true. Yeah.
So I think about manipulation. I think it's up to everyone, of course, to decide what's manipulation, what's not. I would say using tools of influencing, tools of persuasion to get my grandmother to buy Bitcoin, that would be manipulation. But anything that's for the good of the company and the good of the individual, the good of the team, or the good of my life, and of course, my life sometimes comes behind and sometimes before. Others would not be manipulation, but the sort of influencing that we do anyway, and often we do it unconsciously and accidentally, so much better to do it consciously. So that's why I think leaders have to have certain tool sets. They need to have the leadership styles at their disposal. They need to have rules of influencing at their disposal. They need to have decision-making tools at their disposal in order exactly to be able to get people on board for what they know is the right thing to do.
Gosh, you make leadership sound so difficult, Franziska. So much requirement to be a leader. Is it more difficult today in this fast changing world to be a leader, or is it always been equally difficult?
I think it's always been equally difficult. I think to a certain extent it's even easier now because we know so much more. I mean, these rules of influencing, decision-making tools, it's measurable. Go to Google Scholar on anything, and then of course you get enough people like me who digest it for you. But you can also ask AI. So there are lots of apps, and I'm just programming one. Not, I'm having one programmed as well, where you can just put in your leadership situation and get some advice. And of course, it's not 100% correct, but it gives you really good ideas. So there are many more tools around now, and there's so much more knowledge at our fingertips because of the net.
Yeah, that's undeniable. Yeah, the technology's democratizing so much nowadays. We've all got access to so much more. We're almost towards the end of this fantastic discussion, Franziska, and I love the direction in which it's gone, and the luck, the circumstance that we talked about. I think that that really resonates. It fits so well with all your thought leadership around humility. I'd like to believe when I was younger that it was all down to my hard work and innate ability, and then I realized it wasn't. That of course luck plays such a part, including having people around us who can support us. I think the perseverance part is key, and I've many times I've found myself quoting Nick Faldo, who was often people said he was a lucky winner, a golf champion, and he had the great response, which is it's true. I'm lucky, and I love that humility. He said it's true. I'm lucky, but what I do find is that the more I practice, the luckier I get, and I think that's that's such a good line, and I'm often finding myself looking into the sports world. I came up with a new one, didn't come up with. I just stumbled into another one again, thanks to so much technology around from Roger Federer the other day, who was a wonderful speech at which he was acknowledging that while he won 80% of his matches, he only won 55% of his points. And there's a great lesson in perseverance there for all of us, that we if we keep playing, we don't need to win every time. We just need to win a little bit more than we lose to be successful.
Those are really lovely quotes. Wonderful. I've got another one to sort of
Please do.
add to this, by Arthur Ashe, the first tennis player of color in the US, and he said, "Start where you are. I mean, the past is gone, so focus on what we've got now. Use what you've got. We haven't got more, but do what you can." I.e., for that little bit for which we actually have 100 responsibility, use that responsibility 100%. And I think that goes very nicely along with what you've said. And that, to my mind, is also a very humble approach, fully taking responsibility for that which we can take responsibility for.
We have a sphere of influence, and operating within it to maximum effect seems to make sense. And recognizing where the boundaries are is what you're saying, Franziska. Yeah. And recognizing boundaries as well. I appreciate we're almost out of time, so respecting your time. Sincerest thanks, Franziska, for an absolutely wonderful conversation. As always, it's fantastic to be talking with you.
Thank you very much. It was very great joy. And it's always interesting when different questions get asked like that. I start thinking again and have already now uncovered another 2-3 pieces of research I want to do in order to go more down the line of what we've talked now. So thank you very much also for the inspiration.
Not at all. Absolute pleasure. Thanks again, Franziska.